Hi everyone, welcome back to Winging It. My name's Rebecca. If you're here for the first time, you are very welcome, and if you are a regular, then welcome back. Now it's week 34 and it's the third week in August, and so it's our nature prompt this week. Now I live in rural Lincolnshire in the UK, and it's a farming county, and everywhere I look there are fields full of bales of straw and rolls of hay, and so our prompt this week is harvest. We're going to be trying a new technique this week called needle felting. If you don't have any needle felting equipment, don't panic. I've put a link in the description below to point you in the right direction. But if you don't want to invest in any needle felting equipment, you could substitute it with some watercolour, some acrylic paint, even felt pens will work on a natural fibre. So if you're using wool felt or cotton or linen as your background fabric, anything like that would work a treat. Feel free to substitute the needle felting part with something that works for you. Other than that, we're just going to be using some of our usual resources, so some scraps of fabric, a little bit of Bondaweb and some embroidery threads, and not a lot else really. So this is a quite simple one this week, but I hope you're going to really enjoy it. So gather all your bits and pieces and let's get stitching. So my first idea was to create quite a simple background and then maybe applique a tractor in the middle, and we could make the background mostly hot colours with shades of gold, maybe dark brown, and do something sunsetty or something like that with the sky. But my problem with this one was that I couldn't see ways easily for us to get our stitches of the month in, and we didn't really use them in the first week of August. We used lots last week. I thought it would be a shame to not use them again, so I did park this idea for a bit. My next idea was to create just a pure landscape, and I thought this might be good to do some applique with. We could start with a blue panel for the sky, nice sort of warm blue, and then add some billowy clouds, put a tree line in the background, maybe with our fishbone stitches, and use fishbone stitch again to create some ears of wheat in the foreground, and then just do some simple stitching to suggest more wheat growing in the background. But again, it was going to rely very heavily on fishbone stitch and not very much else, so I parked that one as well. My third idea was to create a top-down view, a sort of bird's eye view of a rural landscape, and this I thought gave me a few more options. Could use some Rhodes stitches and possibly some buttonhole wheels to create some trees around the edges, and then use different patches of fabrics to create some fields, and then add some different kinds of stitching to suggest that a tractor had been round and harvested. But again, it wasn't offering enough opportunities for our August stitches. So the idea that I landed on was this sort of landscape, and again, it is a harvest landscape. I am very inspired by the countryside where I live, and I thought we could do an applique background with some interesting fabrics that showed the different fields, but then we could add some Rhodes stitches or blanket stitch wheels to create circular hay rolls in some fields, and then we could maybe do something like an Algerian eye or star stitches to create some rectangular ones. We could do some sheaf stitch in other fields, and I thought, although it doesn't do the whole range of stitches, we could have some fun with at least some of them in this one. And I thought, rather than having a blue sky, I was driving home from the coast the other day, and there was the most amazing sunset, and I thought it might be nice to create a sunset, and the easiest way I know to do that is with some needle felting. I thought it might be interesting for you to see. I thought we could do something different with our sky and then use some of the techniques that we know for the main piece. So this is what I'm going to go with. I'm going to start with some Bondaweb because we're going to use it to applique on some fields. If you're using a fabric that doesn't fray, you can get away with just cutting out the shapes. So I'm just going to trace through the shapes of my fields. We did use Bondaweb last week, and if you want a really detailed explanation of how to create fields with Bondaweb, our Applique video did something very similar, and I'll link that in a card at the top of the screen. So what I'm going to do is just trace the fields separately from each other, and I want to add on some overlap because I don't want gaps in between my fields, so I just want them to overlap a little bit. And I probably should number them. So I'm just going to roughly cut those out, and now they'll be ready when we are. So I'm going to be working on this gold felt. This is the colour I used to make the sun in our project from a couple of weeks ago, the sunset project. And so this is a lovely sort of warm yellow, dark yellow. And I just want to talk about what I've got on my table. So I've got a selection of fabrics in golds and browns, and I've got a range of threads, and I've got some 6-strand cotton. This is just interesting textured thread. I've got my cottage garden threads, and I've also got a set of threads from Studio Flax. So these are all linen threads, and again I've got some different textures that I can use, all in sort of harvesty shades. So we're going to start with the background, and I just want to explain needle felting. So felt is a great background on which to put more felt, and you need just a few bits of equipment to do that. So the first piece of equipment I need is a felting mat, and this is just quite a dense sponge. It's just so that your felting needle has got somewhere to go. You need a needle felting needle, and this is not a sewing needle, so you can't just use the sewing, well, you could probably have a go with a sewing needle. The key to this needle, I'll see if I can get it in focus for you to show you, is that it has tiny little barbs on it. I hope you can just see that. Those darker lines on the needle are little barbs, and what that does is force the fibres to mesh together, and so that's what creates the background. And then you need some wool roving. I'm going to start with my darkest colour and put that close to the top, and all I'm going to do is just lay the fibres of the roving over the surface of the felt, and then keeping my fingers well out of the way, I'm just going to poke it. I don't claim for a moment to be an expert in needle felting. I have used it a few times on some of my own art projects for this very purpose. So I'm just creating a sky, and that's how I've used it before. It just makes great sort of wispy clouds, and you can fold in any fibres at the edges to crisp up your outline. Now you do have to stab it a bit more than you expect, and if I just lift that off, there's some resistance, and that's because the fibres have been pushed through my gold felt and into this sponge. And if I turn it over, you can see all those fibres coming out the back. So it does work a treat. So let's put a slightly lighter shade on, and I want to keep some of that striation, so I'm letting the roving do its thing really, because it's that wispiness that I'm trying to achieve. Might all be looking a little bit too red, but I'm going to put other colours over the top. You can see I'm just using the tiniest bits of fibre. You can take it from me that it really does hurt if you stab yourself with the needle. So you can see that my left hand is well out of the way all the time. I'm laying the fibres on and then I'm moving my hand out of the way. So you can see how this builds up in layers. You want your needle to go straight down, perpendicular to your mat, rather than at an angle. And I think that'll do. I could carry on, but I'm not going to. So I'm going to store my needle in my mat while I'm working until I can put everything away, just to keep me safe. And there's my panel. So you can see it's just slightly out of shape, just because it's been forced into sort of lots of valleys. So all I do to fix that is just gently pull it back, and it will need trimming and squaring back off, but that's perfectly fine for me to work on. And I'm just going to go down with my scissors. It's really easy to trim, it is just wool fibres. So I'm just going down the edge there and just making sure I've got a nice neat margin. Okay, so now I need to think about my applique. I want my fields to be sort of slightly darker as I go away. Now normally if I was doing a daytime scene I would want my fields to be lighter, but we're doing a sunset, so things are going to be more shadowy when they're further away. So I'm going to start off with some dark brown, and I've done my old trick of forgetting to reverse my shapes, so my field arrangement is going to be backwards from my drawing, but I really don't mind that at all. So I'm just going to press those field shapes onto some fabrics. Now I can cut out my field shape, remembering to add in the overlap. So just to help me with my placement, because I've got to lift that off to get the paper off the back, I'm just going to draw along the bottom edge, and that shows me where I need to place it. So I'm just helping myself a little bit there. So now I'm taking the paper off the back, bring my pad back in and press that. Okay, so that's our fields and our sky, quite like that. So we need to think now about our stitching, and the first thing I'm going to do is just put a little line of running stitch just in a single strand of thread along the edges of my fields, because I just want them to be nice and secure. I've stitched down my fields so they are nice and secure now, and I don't have to worry about fabric lifting as I'm trying to sew. And I really want to use some of these lovely threads that I've got, so I'm going to start with this brown, and I thought we could just put a few sheaf stitches, really small ones, maybe in this field here. This will be quite a subtle effect, I hope. As always, I'm winging it just the same as you, so my sketch is all that I do to plan these pieces. If you're not sure about any of the stitches that I'm going to use, they're all in our August stitch guide, and I will link that in a card at the top of the screen so that you can go and learn these stitches. There we go, so I've got some sheaf stitches in there. So I had a bit of a go at Ermine Stitch, but the thread I'm using is too thick. So I thought, even though it's not one of our stitches of the month, I just want to do some mark making on this back field, just to add a little bit of texture and to suggest that there's something going on in the field. So I'm just going to put some very widely spaced seed stitches. Seed stitch we covered right back in January. It's just straight, tiny straight stitches that go in lots of different directions, and it's just going to add a little bit of interest to that field at the back, and will make it less odd if all the other fields are stitched. I always find that if you add stitching to some parts of a project, it looks peculiar if there isn't some stitch everywhere really. And so I'm just gonna throw in some little marks just to suggest that there's something in that field. You could just put stitches in lines. Could do like a back stitch or running stitch, or even a stem stitch would look good to create almost like plough lines across the field. You can just play around with the stitches that you've gained during the course of winging it and see what you come up with. So there's our seed stitch field. We're moving forward now, so I'm going to use this sort of straw coloured thread. I'm going to work on this field here, and I thought we could do some star stitch squares to look like rectangular bales of hay. So you could do an Algerian eye, but I think I'm going to do star stitch. So I start with a cross stitch. I'm just eyeballing this rather than drawing on squares. You could draw on squares if you wanted to, but I'm just going to do it by eye. I don't mind them being slightly uneven. It looks more organic and natural. So there's my cross, and now I'm going to make a vertical cross. I want to stay within the confines of that imaginary square. So like that, and then you just put a little catching stitch over the centre where all those stitches cross over each other. Like that. And again, I want them to be slightly smaller as I go further back in the field, just to create that sense of distance. So there's my star stitch field, and you can see they're quite irregular. The thick thread means that the stars aren't entirely clear, but I actually quite like it. I like how organic it looks. Now I want to do some Rhodes stitches in our field at the front, and I've just got my circle template to act as a guide, and I want these to be a decent size, particularly at the front. How that tiny one's going to work I don't quite know, but we've marked in some circles, and I've got some of the gold flax linen thread, and let's start with a large one first of all. So again, Rhodes Stitch is in our August stitch collection. Now I'm not going to put the stitches precisely next to each other. I'm going to make this Rhodes stitch a little bit looser, mostly because I like the way that the uneven star stitches look, so I'm going to try and create something a little bit more organic. There's our first one. I really like that. I love that twist that forms at the centre of a Rhodes stitch. I think it's just lovely. So I'm going to put some more in and then we'll come back and see what finishing touches we need to do. I've put in my Rhodes stitches there. Really enjoying the way this is looking. And I thought, we haven't got anything in this field. I've just got some of this sort of gold thread, this one here, and I thought I would try some more Ermine stitches in this field here and just add a little bit of something there. I've just got a single strand because I want the shape of the stitch to show up. So I'm trying to get these ones at the back as small as I possibly can because I really like the way that shrinking the stitches down is creating depth. So there's our Ermine stitches. I could leave it there. I do quite like it, but I am slightly concerned that my sky is very red compared to the golds in the lower portion, and I don't want to lose that sense of the needle felting, but I did think that it might be nice to put a sun in, so I'm just going to put a semicircle and I'm just sort of dabbing my pen because I don't want to drag the needle felt, so just making a sort of dotted line for my sun. And I thought I'd use this linen thread here. It's quite fluffy and I thought it might work quite well. So one of our August stitches that I haven't used yet is the buttonhole wheel, so I thought I would put that in for the sun. So we start on the outer edge. And then go to the centre. And I'm going to try and work these fairly close together. Like that. So we've got the sun on the landscape, and then I thought I would just add some little horizontal straight stitches here and there, just varying the lengths of them, just to put some sun streaks in the sky, and that's going to add some stitch to that upper portion and put some yellow in as well that I think is going to balance things out, and I'll put some other shades of yellow I think as well. There we have our stylised harvest landscape, and if I just use the aperture like I normally do, just to give you a bit of a sense of what it looks like without all the ragged bits around the edges, I'm actually quite pleased with that. It's fairly simple this week, fairly stylised, but I do like the depth, and it's nice to have a little bit of landscape. I keep talking about doing landscapes and then never actually doing a landscape, never choosing that one. So we've chosen one this time and I think it's worked really nicely. I can't wait to see what you create with the prompt for harvest. Do share your creations using hashtag FSH winging it, and so that we can see them all together, if you also add hashtag FSH winging it 34, that will create a little cluster of them over on Instagram so you can have a look. We've learnt a new skill this week, so if you want to have a go at some other new skills, I'll put a link to a video here, and I'll put a link up here to a video that's best for you. Do give us a like if you've enjoyed that, and if you want to subscribe, click on this button here and it'll make it really easy for you. Have a great week, happy crafting, and I will see you in the next video.